On today's episode of the show, I'm explaining why Pat Kelsey needs to make a splash in the 2025 recruiting cycle and more, all coming up on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Happy Memorial Day. I ask that you all please join me to take a moment of silence to honor those men and women that gave the ultimate sacrifice for our country to protect our freedoms. Thank you. And as always, I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. More 2025 basketball recruiting talk on this episode of the show. I'm going to explain why Pat Kelsey needs to make a splash in this cycle. We'll also give some recruiting updates for two 2025 players, Isiah Harwell, top 10 player, and then rising big man Zymicah Wilkins. And then at the conclusion of the show, we will dive into another Monday mailbag segment. We had a little bit of a preview episode last time around on the show, right, where we discussed, well, how many scholarships would be available, how important is local recruiting in this cycle, and who are some of the early names to know. And one thing that maybe I didn't really mention, but to me it kind of goes without saying, is that recruiting is changing constantly. And we saw that in the transfer portal. And it might not be as back and forth as the portal goes, but high school recruiting, things change very quickly as well. There are multiple players rising up, respective colleges recruiting big boards, so to speak, because of their play in AAU circuits. The Cardinals have had members of the coaching staff at multiple Adidas summer circuits. They have been on hand at the Nike EYBL Summit and much more. I mean, recruiting will obviously take off this summer. And for Louisville, the question for a lot of people is just how well is Kelsey going to be able to recruit the high school ranks? He got a commitment from Kenai Roots, which was fantastic, was the highest ranked uncommitted player in the 2024 class. He joins the program, and because of how well Louisville recruited in the transfer portal, he sort of gets overlooked by the fan base when we talk about roles for next season, who is projected to be in the starting lineup, etc. But in terms of the 2025 class, this is the first full cycle that Pat Kelsey will have as the head coach of the Louisville Cardinals. And I think that it is critical that Kelsey makes a splash. Now, what I'm not saying is that, again, another thing that I said on the last episode of the show is that things don't always have to be mutually exclusive. Honestly, they very rarely ever are. Like, two things are independent of each other. Like, I can say that it is critical that Kelsey makes a splash, but if he doesn't make a splash, that is within the parameters, I guess, or the qualifications of quote-unquote making a splash. I mean, making a splash is such a loose term that you pretty much have to define what a splash means. So if he doesn't make that splash, but he still goes out and gets a solid recruiting class, that's okay as well. Again, this is just my interpretation, my opinion here, is that Pat Kelsey's, unfortunately, just like every other coach that goes from the mid-major to the Power 5 level, he's having to continually prove himself. And he's proved himself already with transfer portal recruiting, going out and getting a very good roster on paper. He needed to prove that he understood this fan base, and so far, 60 days in, it feels like he does. So you can check that box off. Needed to go out and get a solid high school recruit. Now, granted, I would argue that it didn't have to be the 2024 class, but Kelsey saw the opportunity, and they got a commitment from a top 40, arguably top 30 prospect in the class. That's great. Now, I think the attention turns to recruiting. Now, some will say, well, he does have to win games. Of course, that is the number one parameter, the main measuring stick of how successful Pat Kelsey will not be on the recruiting front. It will not be from a fan base perspective. It will be wins and losses. How many games can you win? I don't care what you do outside of that as long as you win. Type thing. But before Louisville plays games, coming up here in about 6 months, the attention to his first full recruiting class is now in full swing. I would argue that Louisville will have anywhere from about 3 to 5 open spots, probably more so 4 to 5, depending on who returns. As I mentioned on the last show, the Cardinals can bring a maximum of 5 players back from this year's team. You're going to utilize the transfer portal. So 3 to 5 transfers, 3 to 5 high school recruits makes some sense. And I think you need to make sure, as Pat Kelsey's probably already doing, is that you prioritize players that fit what you're trying to do on the court. So if you know that a certain player is highly ranked, but he doesn't really fit what you do on the offensive or defensive side of the ball, then what really is the point of bringing him in? You need to go out and get players that will be able to fill roles on the court for your team. That is sort of it's sort of a given, I guess. You don't really have to mention that. I feel like that is what's understood, doesn't need to be explained. But some will say, well, if you're doing that, if you're going out and you're getting players that fit this system, why does it really matter if you make a splash or not, as long as you get your guys in? And I won't disagree with that in principle. In a vacuum, that makes a ton of sense. You want to get the guys that fit your system. But for me, looking at this and wanting Pat Kelsey to prove himself early on, you can do that in the 2025 cycle by going out and getting a top player, obviously one that fits your skill set, or fits your system, I should say. And you're putting the recruiting world on notice. Yes, what you did in the transfer portal is great. Yes, you were opportunistic in getting a top-ranked, uncommitted player. But now all eyes are going to be on you and what you can do in this particular cycle. Now, what constitutes a splash? Like, what is a splash? I would argue a top 30 player. I think that's safe to say. When you say top 15, I think you might be getting a little bit too greedy. But if you can get just one, like, you don't have to comprise your whole recruiting class of top 30 players. That would be nice. If you can just go out and get one top 30 recruit in this class, it will send a shockwave into the recruiting world. Because if you remember, if you want to draw parallels to past coaching staffs, when Chris Mack got that first commitment from Josh Nickelberry back in, what was this, 2018 for the 2019 class, the floodgates opened. Players realized, oh, hey, look, it's cool to go to Louisville again. And this is no disrespect to Chris Mack, to Josh, to any of those guys that committed. Josh was ranked just inside or just outside of the top 100, depending on what recruiting service you looked at. You could take this one step further. If you want Louisville to get back to that level to where they're recruiting at high ranks, now I understand you said, well, Louisville historically hasn't recruited guys, all that highly rated. True, but that doesn't mean that they can't start. And one way for them to do so is to show that, hey, look, it's almost like you're showing other recruits that, hey, it's okay to come here. Look, this top 30 player recruited here. That means you can do the same. The chain reaction here is going to be huge if you can get that done, if you can make a splash. That's where I'm coming from here on this stance. I'm not saying that if Kelsey doesn't land a top 30 recruit, that this recruiting class isn't going to be good enough. I'm not going to say that. I am going to give Pat Kelsey the benefit of the doubt that he can develop his players regardless of their ranking, and it's all about fitting a need. Excuse me. And being cohesive, I should say, in this system. So I'm just saying, as we continually preview 2025 recruiting, the first full class is a great opportunity for Kelsey to make yet another statement. Now, I've said that multiple times. Pat Kelsey made a statement today. Pat Kelsey made a statement with this. Yes, he's going to have to be like a politician and continue to make statements until he proves that he is the guy. That's the unfortunate reality of it. That's the unfortunate reality of hiring a mid-major coach. Nothing personal against Pat Kelsey. It's more so him having to prove himself, which I believe he's doing and which I believe he will continue to do. He has a great pulse on this fan base. He understands what this fan base is looking for. He understands the expectations. And I think ultimately he just gets it, for lack of better terms. So in my opinion, I think that it is wise to make a splash here, because not only are you adding a very, very good player to the team, but you are going out and you are really putting the rest of the college basketball landscape on notice, saying, hey, look, I don't care what Louisville used to be over the past couple seasons. We're going to be legit. So we're going to turn our attention to giving some more updates to recruits in particular that we're going to discuss on today's episode of the show. We will talk about both of them here coming up momentarily after we tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fits only available to U.S. customers. Cardinal fans, if you're finding yourself continually watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV and you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting, you need to make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Giving a little bit more updates as we continue through the last week of the month of May. We talked about 3 players on the last show that Louisville is getting involved with. 2 more players that you need to at least be familiar with, I should say. The first one is Isiah Harwell. Louisville just offered him. Again, I am trying to go away with just talking about offers unless they are truly significant, and in this case, the latter is the case. Harwell is a top 10 recruit, ranked as the 7th best player according to 247sports.com. Louisville just offered the 6'6" guard from Mount Pleasant, Utah, plays at, I think it's Wasatch Academy is how you pronounce it. And the 6'6" top 10 prospect is, he's very, very good. That goes without saying. Complete guard, doesn't really do one thing that is separating himself from the others, but he does a lot of things really, really well. 3-level scorer, great defender, solid athlete, underrated lateral quickness, everything that you could ask for in a fundamental 2 guard. He has 2 guard size, being 6'6". The main thing here is that Louisville's going to have to play catch up in this recruitment because Harwell released a top 9 last fall. And you look at who is in that top 9, and a lot of it is West Coast flavor. There's a lot of West Coast influence in this recruitment. I think it's going to be challenging to take him from the West Coast. He has a family that played for Idaho, that played for Boise State. But it is clear that his recruitment is still wide open, and Louisville will have to play catch up. At this point in time, if you made me choose that who is the presumed leader in this recruitment. I would probably say that Gonzaga is at the moment. They got the most recent official visit back on February 3rd. The main thing here is going to be determine what the timeline looks like for his commitment, but the fact that Louisville is offering these top players now, don't get me wrong, it's not an unexpected trend. I mean, Louisville has always offered top prospects. The main thing here is, well, how involved is Louisville going to get with these top guys? We saw they got involved with Jaden Quaintance. They got involved with Kenai Roots. Who will be the player that they try to make a splash with? And Isiah Harwell could be one of those players. But as I mentioned, like J.J. Mandequit, a name that we discussed on the most recent episode of the show, it's going to be hard to take a West Coast player from the West Coast. And that is a trend that you should not be confused by or caught off guard with. So it's going to be tough to get a player like Harwell. Main thing is now you have to get him on campus for an official visit, try to build that relationship up. Pat Kelsey is having to play catch-up regardless by default because he took the job back in March. So it's fairly obvious, that to make a big splash, you're still going to have to play catch-up. However, the perception of Louisville is already changing. It's shown by a couple of recruitments that we talked about. Another one that we'll talk about is Zymicah Wilkins. Wilkins is a top 100 player, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, 89th best in the country, 13th best center, second best in the state of North Carolina. Has really transformed his body. He's lost some weight between the winter and now. The 6'8" center has gotten a bunch of offers recently. Georgia, Clemson have offered in the past week. He's got offers from Villanova, Virginia Tech, NC State, you name it. But he doesn't have that Louisville offer yet, but claims that he wants to visit Louisville. When you have top 100 players wanting to visit your school, even if you haven't offered them so far, understand how significant of a movement that is. Now, maybe in Wilkins' case, it's because of his relationship with assistant coach Ronnie Hamilton. It was mentioned when Hamilton was hired that he is a great recruiter, one of the best in the country, and we're sitting here like, well, he's going to have to show it. You're already seeing it pay off dividends. Players starting to consider Louisville because of Ronnie Hamilton. I mean, I think it was J.J. Mandequit that said, I don't really have a relationship with Pat Kelsey, but my family's good friends with Ronnie Hamilton. Hamilton was the lead recruiter for Wilkins while Hamilton was at LSU. So the relationship is there, and that relationship is going to be key for the 2025 recruiting class. And I think that Pat Kelsey can close a deal, but to get the ball rolling and get involved in a certain recruitment, you might need that relationship to open that door for you. And we've seen that happen for a couple of recruitments so far. Now, one thing about Wilkins I'm interested in, I wouldn't say concerned about, but interested in, is Wilkins is 6'8". He's listed at 215 pounds. Even if he's a little heavier than that, you wonder, okay, what role does he play? Because he's raw on the offensive side of the ball. He has a great motor, tenacious defender, athletic, runs the floor really well for his size in transition. Underrated ball handler and passer, but has to continue to expand his offensive game. Is he a small ball 5? I'm not necessarily sure what the role would look like. So that's the main thing for me, is determining, well, what does the role look like for Wilkins in this offense? Is Kelsey wanting to go with more size at the 5? Or maybe if Wilkins continues to expand that offensive skill set, he plays at the 4. But at this point, I think he's more of a 5 than a 4. So that's something to focus on here and, ask the question, how does he fit what Pat Kelsey's looking for? Well, the rebounding, the ability to run the court well in transition, high motor, etc. So this is one to focus on here. And agreed that, yes, you have the relationship with Ronnie Hamilton, but Louisville hasn't offered yet. So maybe this is all a moot conversation if he doesn't get that offer. But I did want to highlight that Wilkins wants to visit Louisville because it shows that there are starting to become top 100 players that are interested in Louisville, even if they are not interested in those players. Now, I'm not saying that Louisville is not interested in Wilkins, but again, you understand exactly what I'm saying. So one thing to focus on here as we continually go through the summer is wondering and monitoring, I should say, is probably a better verbiage use, monitoring the perception of this program and seeing how it's being rebuilt and seeing how the Louisville image is starting to be revitalized across the country, across the recruiting circles, etc. So again, 2025 recruiting will be a major topic this summer. But to conclude the show, we will dive into a weekly mailbag segment, the Monday mailbag. Before we do that, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast, once again, is free and available on all streaming services, including YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcast, you name it, whatever streaming service you utilize, it is there. It's also on WHAS 11 Sports on their main website. But definitely appreciate everyone for liking, sharing, subscribing, rating the podcast on all streaming services. To conclude this Monday edition of the show, we are diving into, yes, a Monday mailbag segment. A lot of great things to discuss on the show and a lot of great questions to answer as well. The first one is very interesting. It comes from a scheduling perspective and content programming more appropriately. I really was interested in this question because it made me start to game plan before I was planning on doing so. The question is, with basketball recruiting seemingly dwindling down, football is in the off season, what do June and July entail in terms of content? That's a good question. And if you are familiar with the show and you've been listening for the past couple of years, first of all, thank you so much. But you already know what I'm about to say. If you're new to the show, no shame in that. Welcome. Glad to have you on board as well. But a part of Locked On, for the Locked On Louisville podcast specifically, the podcast is deemed in season from August to May. So there are 19 monthly episodes from August to May. In the off-season months of June and July, I don't know what the number will be this season, but it's likely going to be either 12 or 13 episodes a month. So by default, that means no 5 episodes a week. It's probably going to be 3 a week. And again, the question is great because yes, content, you have to manufacture a lot of the topics. There will be a couple of series that I will probably get into. We will rank the top 15 players for the football team, either in June or July. We will give full positional breakdowns. Maybe in June or July, that might be more so geared towards August when we come back in season. I'm looking to have some special guests. We'll have some interesting topics to discuss, but I'm open to ideas. If you have a topic that you want to be covered over the next couple of months, definitely feel free to reach out. You can either do so on Twitter at @defense_, or you can comment in the YouTube comment section below. But again, this is a podcast for you all, and I'm open to, addressing any questions. So next question, I should say, Louisville has seemingly going to miss the NCAA baseball tournament. Do changes need to be made? What needs to happen? I mean, yeah, if they do miss the tournament, I think that the bracket is released today. I wouldn't expect Louisville to make it. If they do, great. If they don't, it's the third year in 4 seasons which they've missed the tournament. 21, 23, and 24. Obviously, 2020, you kind of throw that out the window. But, yeah, not great. I think some staff changes need to be made. I think something needs to happen with the pitching, coaching. Roger Williams has been great here, but I'm not sure what needs to change. I don't think Dan McDonnell leaves. I think, yes, Louisville needs an improved NIL budget. But at the same time, I think that there has to be a urgency to recruit outside of a couple of states and to really lean into the transfer portal. Next year is going to be a key season for Dan McDonnell. And it's obvious that something, I'm not sure what, but something has to change this offseason. Brandon Lane has flipped from Louisville to Wisconsin. How significant of a loss is that? I mean, flipping from two schools in just the spring portal alone, it's kind of wild to me. Now, granted, I'm not going to criticize the player for making the decision that he feels is best for his career. Best of luck to him. He was going to be a rotational defender on this defensive line. This move was a depth move. It was going to help with rotational depth, which I thought that he was going to be a part of the two deep, which I'm not going to I'm not going to lie here. I was excited to bring him on. I thought that he was going to be a key depth piece, but it's not the end of the day, or it's not the end of the day. It's not the end of the world with him going elsewhere, flipping from Michigan State to Louisville to Louisville, or from Michigan State to Louisville, from Louisville to Wisconsin. I mean, it just sort of is what it is. I mean, he didn't spend over a week being committed here, so I'm not really going to lose sleep over this. It just, I keep coming back to this is what it is. I mean, that doesn't take away the excitement slated for this season. So I feel good about this Louisville team and how well they can play. So do you like that Louisville has a non-conference, non-Power 5 opponent to start the year this season? It's the first time that they've had that in some time. So for those that are a little bit maybe questioning what the question is stating here, basically that Louisville is opening up against Austin Peay this season. And in the past, I mean, 2021 was Mississippi, 22 were conference opponents, 22 and 23, Syracuse and Georgia Tech. In 2019, it was Notre Dame, 2018, Alabama, 2017, Purdue. So in 2015, Auburn. So if you look back, 2016 and 2020 were the years in recent memory where Louisville didn't open up against either a conference team or another Power 5 team. 2016 was Charlotte when Lamar had, 8 touchdowns. 2020 was Western Kentucky in that shortened pandemic season. It was just sort of a weird season. But Louisville opens up this season with Austin Peay on August 31st. And after that, they will play Jacksonville State. They won't play a Power 5 team until week 3. Which is very interesting because Louisville has a bye sort of built in to the early season. You have Austin Peay, and then you have Jacksonville State, and then you have an off week before you play Georgia Tech on September 21st. So I like this because it's a brand new team. It's got brand new players. New personnel. Louisville got lucky that they woke up in that game against Georgia Tech. They struggled early on, and I like that they have a couple of games to be able to work through sort of some of the growing pains. They almost lost Indiana as well, and then week 4 they started to get things rolling. But this season they have basically 4 weeks before they play a Power 5 team. Now, Jacksonville State, I think, will be an underrated opponent. They have given some fits to Power 5 teams, or with Rich Rodriguez. But I like this. I like that Louisville's going to be able to get guys some reps, be able to work through some of the issues, and not have to be worried about truly losing a game. Now, anything can happen, but you feel better about playing Austin Peay than you do some of the teams that Louisville's played over the past 8-9 seasons. So I'm okay with it. So that is going to wrap up this Monday mailbag segment of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here coming up